Les contemplations. Les contemplations.
Now, before we get into this video, I'd like to remind you that you can now receive a special discount on your next watch from WatchBox. Check the description below for a promo code exclusively for the good Gentry. For those of you new to the channel, WatchBox are the world's leading, most trusted and respected dealers in pre-owned luxury watches. Onwards and upwards. Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. Today, no wristwatch check necessary because I am actually wearing the watch in question. It's the very fittingly named Superman from Yema. As you guys know, every month I try and cover a brand or a model of watch I haven't previously discussed or reviewed, and this time it is this absolute historic legend. Now, if you'd like to see more watches in this kind of price range or other brands that are underrated, to be honest, this is highly underrated in particular, please do like this video. So you're probably wondering, what has Victor Hugo and the French Air Force got to do with dive watches, right? So let's start off with the history and then take a look at the watch itself. Yema have, quite simply, an extraordinary history. Founded in 1948 by Henry Louis Belmont in Besançon, which happens to be the birthplace of Victor Hugo. Mr. Belmont was a pioneer French watchmaker who had graduated from the watchmaking school in the city of the brand's founding. Located in eastern France, this is close to the Jura Mountains and the border with Switzerland. What makes this brand so special is the massive accomplishments it has achieved in a relatively short amount of time, as well as becoming France's premier watchmaker in the 1960s. The Superman collection of watches is aptly named, as it is the watch that made the brand what it is today, and its success helped to propel Yema into making several more iconic watches. First released in 1963, it was initially developed for diving professionals, but soon expanded into many versions and eventually being supplied to pilots of the French Air Force. This 300-meter diver was highly respected for its robust and unique locking mechanism incorporated into the screw-down crown to securely lock the dive time bezel. This combination of durability, function, and being French-made, of course, ensured it was a natural choice for the French military when they wanted to supply their top pilots with a watch. Following the success of the Superman, Yema then introduced the yachting graph in 1966, and then the rally graph in 1968. Both of these were chronographs. The yachting graph was an automatic, had an impressive 200 meters water resistance, and was designed for sailing enthusiasts, while the rallygraph was equipped with a tachometer and was intended for racing car drivers. The watchmaker struck gold again when the rallygraph was worn by Mario Andretti, one of the world's most successful and legendary drivers in the history of motor racing. This Italian-born American is one of only 2 drivers to have won races in Formula 1, IndyCar, the World Sports Car Championship, and NASCAR. During the late 1960s and early 70s, Yema became the leading exporter of French watches, with more than 500,000 watches sold every year across 50 countries. But not content with the conquest of the racetrack, skies, and the oceans, Yema embarked on its most remarkable adventure yet by being the first French watch in space with the Spacenaut chronograph, originally released in 1982. It accompanied first-time French astronaut Jean-Luc Caniatin for a 10-day trip into space that same year, and then again in 1988 on a mission to the Mir space station. Yema survived the quartz crisis of the 1970s, but in an interesting twist of fate, it was the Seiko Corporation of Japan that bought the company in 1988. It was then sold into French hands again in 2004, and after 4 years of research and development, Yema designed a new proprietary watch movement all of their own. The MPB 1000 was finally finished and introduced in 2011 as the first and completely in-house automatic caliber from the brand. There are several stories and theories on how Yema got its name. However, if you look at the etymology of the word, its origins can be traced from Spanish, meaning the gold yolk, or the bud in the egg, which in turn originated from the Latin gemma with a G, meaning the core gem or jewel. So here we are in 2020 with a modern incarnation, a 300-meter water-resistant Superman Heritage automatic. This collection has now expanded to include GMTs, quartz, maxi dial, and even bronze versions. So without further ado, let's get in to the dimensions. First of all, the diameter is just below 39 millimeters. We have a height of 13 millimeters. Then a lug to lug, what is that? 48 millimeters. And then the lug width of 19 millimeters. It's important to note there are two sizes. So if this is too small and you have the larger wrist, there's a 41 millimeter diameter version. And I believe it goes for the same price. The weight is around about 156 grams, and it does wear a little larger because of the quite long lugs here, even on my 6¼ inch wrist. So let's talk a little bit about this bezel. Well, firstly, it's an aluminium insert. It sits slightly above the main case with a high polish coin edge protruding ever so slightly with a satin brushed section below it, making it very ergonomic and easy to grip. It's 120 click and unidirectional. It does feel extremely solid with very little play. In fact, I'll demonstrate it in just a moment. The bezel play is something Yema have actually conquered, as it features the first and only nifty little locking system incorporated into the crown. In fact, since 1963, all Yema Superman dive watches, with the exception of a few of the modern GMTs, feature this clever little locking mechanism. Now, it's relatively simple. You just unscrew the crown, and then of course you can turn it. It's a simple bracket there that you see that allows the bezel to rotate when the crown is screwed out slightly, but then locks against the bezel edge when the crown is fully screwed in. Glycine have something similar with their equally iconic Airman, but Yema did away with having to have or depend upon a second crown to do so. Now the result is an extremely secure bezel that won't budge when bumped, and therefore it will not muck up any timing that you may be doing. The threading of the screw down crown is a little extra than normal, and justifiably so. It is signed with that charming Y curvaceous engraved logo there. The size and feel of the crown, I have to say, is just perfect. Easy to manipulate, not too overpowering in scale. The crown guards do not interfere with the action of the crown, but at the same time do protect it. And I love how it follows the gentle sloping lines of this case elegantly. The way the flat bezel section sits on the case is rather UFO shaped, and makes me think of the 1957 Omega Seamaster, even the Speedmaster a little bit too. This early 1960s vintage vibe is then continued with the bewitching, very tall but lovably domed sapphire glass you see there that has a light magnifying lens effect for better dial readability. As you can see, most of the case is in a high polish. The transitions, shapes, edges are all flawless, and in hand feels like something costing a lot more. I was immediately impressed at the finishing at the time when I first opened its rather snazzy little leather zipped case that ships with the watch. I love it when brands actually provide a reusable case, not just some massive heavy box that, takes up space. dial is very Submariner-esque, with a triangle at the 12, rectangles at the 6 and 9, and then circular markers in between. They have a subtle greenish lemon yellow and generously applied too that really evokes the kind of puffy look of old vintage tritium dials. There's a date at the 3 o'clock and crisply contrasting white printing. It's more classic looking than the numerals of the 1960s original and reminiscent of an early 1680 Submariner, to be honest. But then it is complemented by a very functional handset, more in keeping with the first 1963 generation of this watch. We have a broad segmented arrow for the minutes, always the most important hand for a dive watch, of course. It reaches to the edge of the dial nicely. Then we have a simple baton style for the hours, then a very cool kind of stoplight shovel tip for the seconds. The red dot is the only dash of color in this particular version, very subtle in a mostly monochromatic or monochrome, I guess you could say, watch. The hands effectively distinguish themselves from one another and also give a pleasing sense of character, like its mid-century ancestors. Functionally speaking, of course, they are very efficient, even if the dial is actually kind of small in comparison to other watches in similar case sizes. The high polish inner chapter ring that frames the matte black of the dial works nicely with the glass and very much accentuates the alluring distortions, as you can see when I move it around, almost giving a magnificent water-like effect. The hands are also loomed nicely with superluminova, as is the matching dial markers and bezel loom pip. Orientation and low light legibility is outstanding. It's refreshing to see a vintage-inspired diver that is not overdone and ruined by that faux patina, which seems to be very common these days. The screw-in caseback, if we have a little look, is quite simple. We just see the heraldic style coat of arms Yema logo to further underline this being part of the heritage collection. The bead blasted areas really making it stand out. The steel bracelet is one of several the watch is available with, and is attached with solid end links to a rather slender pointed drilled lugs. With this predominantly understated color scheme, it's obviously going to be undoubtedly a strap monster. So I'm very happy to see these feature on the lugs. The elegant tapering bracelet itself is a bit like a kind of flattened Jubilee with high polished center links flanked by brushed links surrounding them. The individual links are more like rounded and rectangular in shape rather than the semicircular links of the Jubilee. It does wear in a very similar fashion. I'm sure many will scoff at the slightly jingly-jangly nature of it, but as a big Jubilee fan, I absolutely adored this. It gave it a little bit of extra vintage charm, so to speak. The clasp is your standard affair, with a safety fold-over and several micro adjustments, and included is a hidden diver's extension, which I have to say is probably the most solid feeling part of the clasp. Powering this reborn legend of the deep is the no thrills but down to business Sellita SW200-1. Understandable at this price range, but for a superior in-house caliber you can pay a little more. But you know, we have to bear in mind this is still at the 1,000 to 2,000 price range, and even beyond that bracket we see many companies using this particular movement. It's the go-to choice for most of the watch industry. As expected, I've never had any problems with this highly robust movement, and I don't imagine many will. It is affordable to maintain, includes hacking, quickset, manual wind. It's 26 joules, 28,800 vibrations an hour, so it very much is the no-brainer. Now, while the 38-hour power reserve is nothing amazing, they actually have regulated this out of the factory with a minimum accuracy of plus or minus 12 seconds per day before it actually goes to the customer. But I can happily report that this one is even better than that and behaving as if it's a chronometer. So let's talk positives and negatives. Well, firstly, it is impeccably made. And in terms of price, the quality stands up to anything made just over the border in Switzerland for the same amount, and for even more for that matter. It's a significant step up from anything most micro brands offer at this range. The biggest advantage here is, of course, the illustrious history. Being made in France, it was supplied to the French Air Force, and having a totally and unique feature all of its own, the highly practical locking bezel. It is also very comfortable. I found myself proud to wear it. It gives that vintage feel without any of the worries of a delicate watch from decades ago. It also has that difficult to pull off balance of elegance and function. It can work with almost any attire and practically any strap, no matter if it's rubber, nylon, leather, or you're wearing a tracksuit or you're in business smart attire. It will look the bee's knees. It's a strong classic design that is iconic in its own right. It manages to hold its head up high with pride in a genre of watches that has been flooded with so many derivative designs. In terms of negatives, well, nobody likes a 19mm lug width. Why companies still insist on making these odd sizes completely baffles me. You either have to have an unsightly gap or try and squeeze in a 20mm strap into it. It's also always tricky to find straps that you actually like or are in supply in these strange sizes. While we are discussing the bracelet, I am not a fan of the clasp. I feel it does feel a little bit dated, and also the pin connected links. I would have loved to see a double push button deployment on this. I think that's the only major downfall here. Even with my hands normally without gloves, it's difficult to actually flip this open sometimes. Another little detail which I would have changed is the end link here is, as you see, brushed, and then the top of the lugs are polished. I don't think that kind of blends in as nicely. I would have liked to see either the case brushed at the top or this section high polished. I don't know, probably the case would have been better, a bit like an oyster case of a Rolex, just so it blends in a little bit more neatly. Again, this is a very, very minor gripe. This certainly has not stopped me from enjoying the watch. But lastly, I know I'm going to get the inevitable comments about the movement. It always happens at this price range. People simply don't understand the costs involved in making your own in-house caliber, although Yema have, and you only have to pay, I think, about $400 to get the in-house caliber, which you gotta admit is an admirable feat. On the other hand, if a repair or service is needed, I would actually probably feel better with the Sellita, the ever reliable ETA clone. It's just easier to fix and has better component compatibility. So in conclusion, this watch is the Kippers Knickers. It's certainly not perfect, let's just put it that way. But then again, you can't really expect perfection for just over 1,000. I think it's 1,100 or thereabouts. Now, what I love the most about this particular watch is just when I thought I could not be impressed by another vintage style diver, here comes along this hot little French number that has very much melted my heart and reignited so many passions. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's affordable. It's something you would only see on the wrist of a true watch enthusiast. So in conclusion, well, ultimately, vive la France and vive the pure class. So final thoughts, two little addendums to the review. Firstly, I'd love to see a no-date version in the collection. I think it would have been a really worthy addition to the heritage line. And secondly, I think France at the 6 o'clock could have been printed a little bit larger. It's something to be proud of, so why not announce it a tad bit more? But that's about it. A special thank you to Vanessa at Yema for so kindly lending this in and making this review possible. I wish more brands would work with social media, YouTubers, you know, all that good stuff. It speaks volumes about Yema, it really does. They're embracing YouTube. Anyway guys, I'm gonna leave it there. Please don't forget to add your thoughts, queries, comments, opinions, all the rest of it down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit that like button. It really does help. And I will catch you in the next one. Okay, thank you. Ciao. We all work hard for our money, so when it comes time to spend it on a luxury watch, the best way to take your money furthest is to buy pre-owned. With some dealers, this might be risky, but not at WatchBox. As a former customer, it was only natural I became part of the WatchBox family. I fell in love with the easy, safe, and professional manner in which they do business. So why are they so highly regarded? Authenticity is always guaranteed. Every watch comes with a 2-year warranty, and WatchBox has their own in-house Swiss-trained expert watchmakers. They have a global presence and an unrivaled selection. It's simply the best way to buy, sell, and trade your watches from the comfort of your own home, anywhere around the world, with a team comprised of passionate watch enthusiasts. As an Urban Gentry viewer, you can also benefit from this wonderful partnership with WatchBox. They are generously offering all Gentry members and viewers exclusive discounts on their next purchase. Please check the description below for the promo code to enter on their website. WatchBox is not just the best option to consider, it's the future of buying and selling watches online.